So thank you very much for coming. And yes, just to give you a little bit of context beyond that introduction. So myself and Hadi are part of the Sound Image Research Centre at the University of Greenwich, which is an internationally recognised and multidisciplinary research hub. So that's why we kind of come from slightly different backgrounds. And as part of that group, we kind of reflect on sound and image to try and find new and interesting ways to understand the world, to understand the built environment in the context of our talk, and to create positive change and enrich lives. What we're going to do today is talk about two projects that we've been working on together that are formed around an investigation or an exploration of brutalist residential complexes. One of them in London, Thamesmead, and one of them outside Tehran, called Ekbatan town. And the aims of this project were to try and kind of explore or understand one site through the lens of another. So through juxtaposition or fusion of sound recordings or film recordings, we hope to expose new meanings or reveal new kind of understandings around each site, always kind of based in our creative practice. The ambition then from that is to try and kind of open up the potential understandings between communities located at the sites and build a kind of methodology that then could be used across different sites to try and use this kind of creative exploratory process to try and find new kind of understandings about the sort of social fabric of places. And one of the things that we wanted to kind of do is to promote that audio-visual creative practice as a tool of analysis. That's something that we're interested in and something that our creative practice as research is involved in. And then the kind of final aim of the project, particularly relating to our audio playscapes project, was about engaging young residents from, in this case it was Thamesmead, but engaging young residents through some of the kind of creative practice we've been working through to give them the same opportunities to engage with ideas around cultural heritage, around urban planning, and to kind of develop their understanding of their own environment.
So yeah, maybe a bit of background about how we met. It was during this project in Ekbatan. That's not a great, that's a screenshot from the film, so it's not great quality. But I was doing field work in Ekbatan. It's in the west of Tehran. It was during COVID, and I was interested in searching for traces of social change in the soundscape of the environment. How could soundscape, reading soundscape, as a system of science could help us understand the processes of social change, how people are connecting during a crucial time like COVID, what changes can be traced. And so this project was conducted via a series of sound walks as well as ethnographic interviews. And it was during this project that via sound and image, I was working with them as a composer. And in one of the meetings we met, and the brutalist aesthetics of these two places kind of connected us because we were both interested in these kind of aesthetics in these places and also the kind of social life that they afford or they prohibit. So both of them. And also I was going to add a note about that this project is very experimental and exploratory at the moment. So we are basically tracing different themes and different paths. So there is no clear end in sight. We're just pushing it in different fronts and see what comes out of it. And audio palayscapes, working with children was a fruit of that project. Yeah.
Yeah. So just to provide some context, we'll show just a minute from the kind of what I would term an essay film that we created. It was a film of 4 chapters of about 5 minutes that involved this kind of audio-visual mapping of the spaces and this attempt to try and use these field recordings or these kind of cinematic excursions through the space to then edit and re-represent the two places into potentially a kind of a new imagined place or to reveal new kind of ideas around either site. So we'll just watch 1 minute. So to give a little bit more information and context on the sites, I'm sure some of you are familiar with Thamesmead as it's relatively local to the University of Greenwich and to where we are now. Perhaps some of you have walked through it. Some of you have, engaged with the sort of visual aesthetics or listened to the soundscape of the place. But for anyone that doesn't know, it's a site that's situated on the south bank of the Thames. It was built in 1967. They started the development. It was originally proposed that it would house 60,000 people. It obviously was designed with these kind of modernist principles, and it was about developing over 15 years, 8 phases of development that would provide kind of equitable and aspirational housing for, the populations of London. And probably you're a little bit less familiar with Ekbatan town, but Hadi can give some info.
It was kind of conceived around the same time, late 60s, and it was started to be produced early 70s. So it's an interesting parallel story because early 70s is a time in Iran that it's a time of very rapid industrialization and urbanization. And so Iran is gaining a lot of money from selling oil. So its oil company has been nationalized, taken from the Brits. And so they were selling their oils and making a lot of money. At the same time, and like in Britain, there was stagnation because of the oil prices. So there's a kind of political background around that, but I'm going to skip that just to get into the story. So around the same time, similar projects with similar ideals of housing mass, populations, same number, like around 60,000 people in Ekbatan as well. And I think that, that's a bit of history about Ekbatan. So
and the idea is that, I think one of the things that we identified was these kind of shared relations, that they come from an architectural kind of tradition, conceptual tradition that brought about these shared aesthetics. They have this kind of lineage of planning and this sort of relationship to post-war urbanization in Tehran and in Britain, a kind of response to a housing crisis. And what it represented in Britain, Thamesmead was an attempt, a sort of state attempt to, through the welfare state, sort of solve that crisis, and through the aesthetics of large residential complexes and open civic spaces, an idea that a kind of a shared, harmonious, modern future would be sort of developed through government intervention. And I think then the sort of the lineages of that were interesting to us, because it's almost like that the utopian ideal is then embedded within those aesthetics. In terms of, for Thamesmead, within the language of the design and development and the early marketing, there was this push for, as a future vision, a town for tomorrow. It was acknowledged that it was a bold design and a radical design, and that design was supposed to, meet the needs of the kind of future families that were going to come and live there. Moving forward, this piece of marketing material is from early 80s. So actually by this point, we're well into what I would say is the perceived decline of Thamesmead in the kind of public imaginary, but still there's this sense that there's a place in London's future. So there's still this argument being made for Thamesmead as a place in London's future, but the reality of the site is that in the public imaginary, through representation in Stanley Kubrick's Clockwork Orange, the site and the aesthetics had already become associated with a sense of decline. And although the complex features relatively little in the film, the kind of affect of that representation had a huge impact on the perception of the site. And so even before it had been kind of completed, and in fact it was never to be completed to the original plans, but even when phase one was just being completed, there was a sense that it was a kind of a failed site. And that's not to say that there were not administrative crises involved around transportation links, around the challenges of the site operating across kind of council boundaries. And as Hadi talked about, the rise in oil prices and the kind of economic slump from 1973 onwards that had an impact on the ability to build. But really, the presentation of the film had quite a profound impact on how people perceived the aesthetics of the site, and the kind of dehumanizing, sort of state-managed and dystopian kind of echoes really stuck.
A very different story in Ekbatan. So although Thamesmead was very quickly associated with those negative affects because of the media representation and also people's experience living in Thamesmead, in Ekbatan, that project was really marketed as a new way of modern life. A lot of Iranian people from rural areas came to that place as professionals, and in Iran, there's a very, very different way of thinking about these states. It's usually associated with some kind of positive affect, mostly. People are happy living in those places. Brutalist aesthetics is kind of considered as somewhat even luxury living in some places. And so similar ideas, similar time frames, but kind of different, really divergent paths.
And what I would argue is that one of the kind of results of this kind of critique of modernist housing that kind of existed within the presentation of Thamesmead as this sort of stalled or dystopian near future, one of the results of that was then Thamesmead became associated with the kind of the uncanny or the weird. And I think I personally, walking through that space, and it has been acknowledged by others as well in kind of texts and analysis of it, that the kind of stalled future or the kind of unusual sort of relationship with time that the aesthetics of the architecture sort of hold, because there's this tension between the sort of the utopian ideals and the administrative crisis of the space, I think then lends itself to this idea of the eerie and the uncanny, which we were kind of interested in exploring and thinking about in relation to the work, and thinking about what kind of potential there was in that, not to fall into tropes around social housing, but to think about potentially, sites of resistance within this kind of hauntological analysis.
Yeah, we kind of pursued the same, idea. Hauntology is a terminology, people who are familiar with works of Mark Fisher, late Mark Fisher. So we took it from there, and there's a connection with the next talk, and we thought that would be interesting to kind of bring it here. But it's also a kind of compositional methodology as well. So to kind of create a sort of eerie environment around these places, looking at one of them from the lens of the other one, but also kind of through a sort of compositional sound process, in my work at least, to kind of try to disassociate all of those affects and create a destabilized state whereby the audience or the participants can imagine new things. Like what are those unrealized potentials that these sites could offer, but because of because of social political processes they didn't realize, or they were stalled. Yes.
Yeah, and I think that through that combination of sound, image, and through the juxtaposition of the sites, you gain that kind of new sense of kind of questioning or potential.
So from the sonic perspective, I work a lot with within this tradition of acoustemology, which was this is a term coined by Steven Feld, anthropologist who worked with Kaluli people in New Guinea in the 60s, and it's basically a combination of acoustic and epistemology, kind of a way of understanding world through sounds. And as I mentioned, understanding the environment through the soundscape, reading it as a system of signs, that's a methodology. And so we kind of try to bring in that ontological aspect from an affective point of view, and acoustemology as a way of composing and through a process that involves ethnography, but also recording and engaging with people, and bring it into this project.
And I think, we'll move through this quickly, but, part of what was informing my practice was the notion of the essay film and the idea of thinking through film and questioning a subject, in an essayistic manner, where you have a starting point, but you don't quite know where you're going to go, and you're going to work through it, to invite in different sources in a kind of bricolage style, taking sources of archive, some voiceover, elements of music, original score that Hadi composed. So bringing all of those elements in to try and kind of weave something that is at times unstable, because the essay film form is unstable, and kind of develop a critique through sound. So there's limited narration, which is a kind of convention of city films such as Patrick Keeler's London and Robinson in Space, which some of you might be familiar with, where you have this kind of unstable narrator that creates this dialogue with the image. In our work, we wanted to try and use the soundscape and the sound marks captured through the kind of field recording and give them a sort of sense of voice or critique. So that was the first stage of the project, which then developed because we had an ambition to open it up, to bring in other subjectivities and to invite particularly young voices and kind of creative practice from young people into the work, to learn from them and to kind of explore it through their eyes and through their processes. So what we did was partner with an arts organisation on Thamesmead called TACO, who are based there, and they're an artist-led organisation with a gallery space. They run projects across a variety of different themes, but they also run a regular club for children between 5 and 12, and it uses experimental creative play to explore social justice issues, and that they felt like a brilliant fit for us to develop or bring some of the methodologies and the creative approaches we'd worked up and bring them to 2 creative workshops that they were going to run, that we led alongside a woman called Natasha Bird, who was their kind of producer. And it involved a sound walk. So we followed some of the same paths that we'd taken on the previous project through Thamesmead, and we supplied the children with sound recorders and cameras so they could engage with the space. And beyond that, we left it very open and really wanted to learn from them. They also did some beautiful drawings of the equipment and of their kind of experience of the sonics of the place.
So one of the ideas was basically these sites are built with a very clear design, everything is worked out to details, and these sites are built for a purpose, and people are meant to use it in specific ways. But bringing in children, and it kind of goes back to my experience in Ekbatan as well. Ekbatan is a massive playground for children. So you can, one of the key sounds of Ekbatan is the sound of children playing. And so engaging with children would give us this perspective of how these sites are actually used as opposed to meant to be used. So how people actually use these spaces that are created in their own way, and they kind of appropriate those spaces for their own purposes. And play is one of the key themes that we explore, because it gives us this sort of playful engagement with the environment and exploring it from a different perspective.
Yeah. And the second workshop that we ran with some of the same participants and some different participants that came and joined was to then take the recordings that those students had made and take them to the digital immersive theatre in Woolwich that the university has recently had installed. And this is a 360 environment. So we were surrounded by screens and projections of their work and also a console set up so that the huge array of surround sound speakers could be used so that the children could manipulate the sounds they'd had in an attempt to kind of sensitize them to sonics and to give them the opportunity to create some of those interesting collisions or juxtapositions that we'd kind of engaged with in our practice first of all. There are also these cool filters which they loved doing and kind of defamiliarizing the landscape. And this is just some imagery to give you a bit of a feel of it.
We're done.
And I think we're at 20 minutes. So what I will do, there is some evaluation. We're still going through the process of evaluation. We've got a kind of an interview set up this weekend with one of the families that came to kind of get some deeper insight into their experiences of it. But there was lots of positive feedback about how it helped the participants to engage with each other and with their space and to consider the sonics of the space. And I'll just play us out with 1 minute, which is a little excerpt from some of the work that was created from those workshops.
Press that, and then that light needs to be on.
Ooh la la. Let's go. This is the noise of wobbling, rattly structures. We are on the trail of the ignorant.
Okay. Thank you very much. Thanks for listening.
And then
Oh,
that light
no,
needs to be
sorry. Thank you.